On human trafficking in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and our efforts to stop it. Let's give a good welcome to Tim Harris.
Let's see if we can make sure our cell phones are turned off because we're going to be filming.
Well, thank you for having me. The program is going to be, I get to start, and then I'm going to introduce Kristin Weis. And she's a great friend of mine. She's a co-founder of the Demand Project, a 501c3 that is based out of here in Tulsa, fighting human trafficking. And then we're going to close with Kathy LaFortune, a lawyer and psychologist, who I have known literally my whole career. In fact, her husband, Bill LaFortune, who you know was an assistant district attorney. He was then a judge, a special judge. He was district attorney. He was mayor, and now he's district court judge. And Bill and I started in the DA's office for David Moss on the very same day together. He came from TU, and I came from the A.W. Coburn School of Law at Oral Roberts University, and we became fast friends. And we've broken bread together and watched our kids grow up and now fly solo. And so Kathy's going to give us some words about what we're doing in Tulsa with the hopefully the building of our new juvenile center and how we are looking at human trafficking here in Tulsa. Many of you know my background. District attorney, I actually prosecuted for 28 years. 16 of those, I was your elected district attorney, and what an honor it was to serve you in that position in the DA's office. I saw something in the last number of years of my prosecution experience that I never ever thought that I would see. You'll remember it, maybe a different forum. Remember the pickle company? And they got prosecuted? Well, they got prosecuted for human trafficking, for forced labor. And what they did is they brought those workers in and they convinced them to give up their documents and their passports and their cell phones, and those men were held captive in forced labor. And since they had a language barrier and didn't have any official documentation and had no cell phone service, they were pretty much prisoned working for the pickle company. Well, that's human trafficking in one aspect. That's forced labor. What we're going to talk about is that, but also human trafficking from a standpoint of view of forced sexual labor. And you say, okay, this is T-Town. We're the Buffalo of the Bible Belt. You must be talking about LA, Chicago, some major metropolitan area. Right here in good old T-Town. I met Jason and Kristin when I was still in the DA's office, and they asked me if I wanted to come on the board of the Demand Project. And we're going to tell you a little bit about the Demand Project today, and hopefully that we can kickstart something. The last time you allowed me to come to talk to you, I talked to you about Christian worldview and how it's necessary in our culture shift to know how to take our Christian worldview in the truth of the Bible into the marketplace, into the courtroom, everywhere that we interact with others. And so my career, I always had a focus on children. I was the first director of crimes against children. I was able to formulate that position when Bill LaFortune was district attorney. He allowed me to go out to the Justice Center, and I said, we've got to do something for the most vulnerable citizens. But they're the weakest and the most vulnerable because they can't vote. They can't write you a campaign check. They're not old enough to go to the polls to change anything. And so they are truly our most vulnerable citizens. And the second is the elderly. And there's so many dovetail similarities between child abuse and elder abuse because they feel voiceless. Well, guess what? If we're going to talk about Christian worldview, it's time to get off the bench and get in the game. You know, the time of talking good talk is over with. In fact, I just got done, I'm not completely through with it, but Bob Buford's book, Halftime. If you haven't picked it up in a while, pick it up, because it will be a great challenge, right? You know, he talks about spending through our 40s and 50s, the first half of our life, you know, success, and then the second half of our life, significance. And for him, it was an aha moment of, if Jesus Christ is my number one priority, then why doesn't my life reflect that? He's probably a multi-million-dollar businessman, got into the cable TV business with his mother down in Tyler, Texas. They actually grew up in Okmulgee and then went to Tyler, Texas. And his dad died when he was young, so mom had to figure out how to support her kids. And she actually, on a flyer, got into the cable TV business before it was just coming of age. And he's got a lot of great things about taking our faith in action and just not words. And it just pierced my heart. So we're going to talk about human trafficking a little bit today. And you know, one of the things I saw when I was DA in the closing years is human trafficking is this crime that is just coming on the forefront, and it's like a locomotive moving down the track at high speed. You know why? Well, it's overshadowing the sale of dope, and the cartels probably aren't very pleased with that. But there's one thing about cocaine and methamphetamine and weed and heroin. You shoot it up, you smoke it up, you snort it up, and it has to be renewed. You gotta get more. With human trafficking, your product is a renewable resource because it's a human being. It doesn't get used up, it doesn't get smoked, and it can be used over and over and over and over again. Now, one of the problems that I see that drives human trafficking is the perverted sense of the male ego to satisfy our perverted sexual desires. 65% of all traffic into Thailand are American males seeking sex trade. How do I know that? Just by chance, my son was on the world race. 11 months, 11 countries, an organization out of Atlanta, Georgia called Adventures in Mission. And he got to spend a month in Thailand. And the place where he was at, it wasn't Bangkok, but it was Chiang Mai. And he ran into it there. And you know what the dream of those young girls was? To become such a high-class prostitute that I could move from Chiang Mai to Bangkok. The president of the country of Thailand has billboards with his picture on it that says, "Our flowers smell sweet, but our girls are even sweeter." Can you imagine that? And 65% of all the air traffic coming into Thailand is Americans going there to seek perverted sexual satisfaction. So, why am I concerned? Why am I getting on this bus? Because the kids that are being wooed into this, and it's not only girls, but stereotypically it is more girls than boys, but with the kind of perversions we're looking at, if they want young boys and they got the cash, they can get anything they want. But these kids have been those throwaway kids. They've been sexually abused at home, so they left home, and now they're living on the street. They come to find out it's not very easy living on the street. You know, you can do it for a while, and then all of a sudden your money runs out, and then how are you going to live? Well, I can't go back home. What do I do? One of the problems, and Kathy LaFortune is going to talk about this a little bit, is when I grew up and started prosecuting in 1983 for David Moss as an intern, we looked at prostitution, right? And we busted the prostitutes. Well, hardly ever did we ever work up the food chain to the pimps, right? Well, guess what? It hasn't changed much. Because whether you like it or not, prosecution of crime is a witness-based program. If you don't have a witness to prosecute to say, on such and such a date, at such and such a place, this happened to me, and he forced me to do it. All right, I hate to cut to the chase, but that's what prosecution is all about. The problem with prosecuting this crime is, in the criminal justice system, in a felony case, if you're going to bust a ring and you're going to get to the pimps, it's about 12 to 18 months before you're ever going to get to the courthouse. Now, you may have a prelim within 4 to 8 weeks, but after the preliminary hearing, you're going to fall in line on the dockets, on the pecking order of 12 months minimum to get to a felony jury trial in Tulsa, Oklahoma. What are you going to do with that child for 18 months? See, the reason they don't want to prosecute is my pimp hurts me, my pimp is sexually abusive to me, but he does provide a roof over my head. He does feed me. And as terrible as my life is, I at least know where my head is going to hit the pillow tonight. Right? So, we get a witness, a victim, who wants to work with us. In the system, the criminal justice system is not set up to house and take care of a victim for a year to 18 months. Where are they going to live? Who's going to feed them? Where do they get their clothes on their back? And that's a real problem that we need to figure out, right? And I'm glad there's mostly men here because I'm going to step on your toes, right? As Christian men in the marketplace, we've got to do something about the demand side of this sexual perversion. Now, we all know you can do programs till you're blue in the face, until you have a heart change, and Jesus Christ changes that heart of stone into a heart of flesh through the power of the Holy Spirit and the blood shed on the cross through Jesus Christ. It's just a program, right?
Yeah, come on.
People get changed from the inside out, right? And so if we're going to change this society, we need to be salt and light in this community and every other community that we go out in to help our brothers fight the addictions that they have.
Come on.
Right?
That's right.
Okay. Now, there is no coincidences, okay? And hopefully I can bring this up quickly. Christine Kane. Anybody follow Christine Kane? Yeah. Christine Kane's from Australia. She was abandoned as a child and left at a hospital with no name. So she actually grew up being like number 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then after she grew up long enough to be adopted, she was adopted out into a family where she was sexually abused for the majority of her adolescent years. She was touched by God, and she's a phenomenal speaker. And wouldn't you know it, today's download to me is about her organization called A21, I think it is. And she says this. She says, isn't it amazing how often we pray for God to use us for His purpose? Then when He interrupts our lives to answer our prayer, we list all our inadequacies. This happened to me. I protested, how can I alone reach 27 people victimized by human trafficking? When all along, God was simply asking, will you cross the street and reach out to one? Mm-hmm. He doesn't ask us to cross the street because we actually have the capacity in and of ourselves to rescue or help people. He asks because He does. He doesn't ask us, quote, are you capable, question mark? He asks, quote, are you willing? Let's be people willing to take that step, go across the road and reach out to a lost and hurting world. And she bases that on Isaiah 6:8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. So, Kristin and Jason Weis, who formed the Demand Project here in Tulsa, said, hey, would you join our board? And I said, in a New York minute. And so 5 of us sit on the board. and we're trying to help them, certainly to raise money. But myself, Megan Simpson, she's the first female judge appointed by Governor Fallon, Karen Gilbert, Tulsa County City Councilor, Ryan Edwards, owner of Vintage Pearl, and James Roberts, a businessman here in Tulsa, and we're trying to grow that and get more people involved, because this is what they're doing. They fight human trafficking to fight three heinous crimes. Sex trafficking. Get a load of this. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children says that at least 100,000 American children are commercially exploited every year. And this does not count the Asian or the Hispanic population. Child pornography. Millions of images being circulated daily involve the rape and torture of children as young as infants. And I prosecuted more cases in my career where young infant babies are videotaped being raped by men. And they're exchanging that amongst one another, and those pedophiles are thousands of images. Okay? Another thing, online enticement. All right. The last time I was here, I passed out a brochure. On July 16th, the Demand Project from 9 to 12 is going to teach you what you don't know about this. Your children's worst enemy.
Yes.
And yet, the internet is one of the greatest educational opportunities we've seen in our lifetime. The problem is they know more about how to operate this than you do.
That's true.
And so they're being trafficked online and enticed, and this is where an individual with a computer can reach children either through mobile applications or on the internet and lure them away from home for sexual purposes, and it's happening every single day. And so you know what? I have a 26-year-old, just turned 27. Natalie worked for the Department of Human Services. My son's 23. He's studying pre-med at Baylor. I wished I had had this when they were in my home as adolescents and teens. I'm going to go to the 3-hour training so that I can be better equipped to inform parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles how to protect our children. You pay the bill for this darn thing, they don't. They don't own it, you own it.
Right.
It's our responsibility to monitor this, and the problem is, from a technology standpoint of view, they know how to operate this in ways that we don't. Hello? We're losing that battle, right? We have a responsibility to our children and grandchildren to be as savvy as they are so we can say no, right? So 3 hours, July 16th, Saturday morning, for $25, you can learn how to operate this thing to protect your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, and your nephews. Think about coming to 61st and Lewis to the Demand Project and get smart. What else? Well, prevention. The Demand Project believes educating, equipping, and empowering the community, and that's what I'm talking about, empowering you, all right? Also, they conduct assemblies with kids to educate kids. Because this is sexual grooming, men and women, okay? The people that do this are very charismatic, all right? They're not going to put you off. They're going to lure you in. Why? Because there's a hole in our hearts always that needs to be filled with the love of Jesus Christ. But until that happens, most young girls need the love of a father so that they aren't looking for love in all the wrong places.
Amen.
Hello? In prosecution, the Demand Project believes that law enforcement plays a key role in stopping child predators, protecting children, and rescuing victims. We've decided that as an organization we should do our part to support their efforts. Demand Project has developed strategic relationship with various law enforcement agencies, including one that I was the commission chair, the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, agencies that target children predators and individuals who commercially traffic people against their will. Now, when I'm done, I'm going to let Kristin come up, and Kristin Weis, co-founder, she's going to talk to you about the other two legs of this four-legged stool: prevention, prosecution, rescue, and restoration. Okay? Jason Weis, at 44, became a reserve police officer for the Jenks Police Department so that he could go online to protect our kids, our grandkids, and those that are possibly going to be victimized. And he's an expert at it. There's nobody better that I've ever been around. In fact, I'm learning from him all the time. So as we look at this, I'll close with this and I'll call Kristin up and then Kathy. And then if you can stay, we've got about a 7-minute video that we want to show you of some true victims of sexual human trafficking. But does it happen here in Tulsa, Oklahoma? I'm actually a supervisor for a TU student who's an intern. She's a legal intern. And as a licensed practicing lawyer, I get to supervise her. Well, she asked me to come alongside of her because we have a family right here, daughter going to East Central High School, where there was a ring of human sexual trafficking going on, and an older male student, 19 years old, and his girlfriend put pressure on a 13-year-old Hispanic girl to start dating a Hispanic boy. Well, she didn't really want to do it until one day they rolled up as she was coming out of the movie and said, "Get in the car or we're going to hurt you." So they drove her around and they brainwashed her and they said, "You're going to come with us and you're going to do what we tell you to do, and if not, we're going to kill you or kill your family." And they pulled out a pistol, a semi-automatic gun, and put it to her head. Well, guess what? What did she do the next time they said, "You're coming with us"? What blows me away is when I was working with Homeland Security on this investigation, she left school at 9 o'clock in the morning for the whole day. I'm asking myself, why the heck didn't she show up on some truant docket, Kathy, right? And so anyway, she gets human trafficked and introduced to marijuana, cocaine, and I'm thinking it's ether because she was a virgin and they put some kind of a cloth over her mouth and she lost consciousness. And when she woke up, her pelvic area was extremely sore and she had been raped while she was unconscious. She did this for approximately 6 to 9 months. While we were there, and since I'm not telling you her name, she was there with other young girls, and 2 of her, quote, pimps were arguing, and one pulled a semi-automatic gun, and there was a tussle over the gun, and a girl that she had never seen before, 12 years old, sitting on the couch, caught a bullet in the chest and died in front of her. I'm like, okay, we're going to take this back to the Tulsa Police Department and homicide because a 12-year-old girl just doesn't evaporate off the face of the map without somebody knowing that. And you know what she said? All I have is visions and nightmares of that young girl slumped over, dead. And some kid by the name, well, I won't tell you his name, but disposed of the body, I guess. And that was at the point that she was back at school trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what is going to happen to me? She had been forced into this for a number of different times. She was brought to a bar here in Tulsa, don't know the name of the bar, but brought to a bar here in Tulsa, kind of paraded before all the Johns, and they would bid and say which girl they wanted, and they would pay for 2 hours, and they got to do whatever they darn well pleased with them sexually for 2 hours. She would still be in it, but at school, they were putting pressure on her to get her other little classmates involved in this, and she was like, no way, right? I'm not going to do that. And one of the guys in the human trafficking ring pulled a knife on her, but another classmate, not associated with them, saw it, and we prosecuted a assault and battery with a deadly weapon as they held the knife to her throat, and that's actually what blew this ring out of the water. And then there was the ongoing Homeland Security investigation, successful prosecution of 1 of the ringleaders, 3 escaped arrest and custody and are back in Mexico. But they wrote her a letter And they said, if you continue to cooperate with law enforcement, we know where your family lives in Mexico, and if you continue to cooperate, we're going to go to that city and kill your family. What am I doing in it? I'm trying to get her what's called a T visa. If you're a victim of a crime, whether you're legal or illegal, it puts you in a status where we need your ongoing cooperation with the investigation. And so I'm trying to get this young girl a T visa along with her young brother, her mother, and a stepdaddy. All right? And that's my connection. There are other girls from Tulsa that were involved in this. I just know that this came out of East Central High School, and so if it's happening there, it's happening other places. Time to get off the bench and get back in the game. And right now you're going to hear from Kristin Weis, who's going to talk to us about rescue and restoration by the Demand Project. Kristin?
So I got to follow that, huh?
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I was trying to think about what I would want to say to you guys, and I got to make it brief because I want Kathy to come up and have her time. So I want to tell you how we got started. I've done hair for like 27 years. I know I started when I was 10. And Jason was an honest businessman, salesman. And we were going to bed one night in our home in Colorado. And it was Channel 9 News. We saw a story, and I don't mean for this to hurt your heart. We'll pray afterwards. But the story on the news, this was like 12 years ago because our baby girl is 12, and she was in her bassinet. In her little bassinet. And the story was of a dad that raped his 2-year-old little girl, and he videotaped the rape, and then he downloaded it onto the internet. And if you think about it being, the internet being 12 years older, you couldn't track IP addresses. So after he downloaded it onto the internet, thousands of people logged on to watch the rape. And they weren't watching to help the little girl. They were watching because they liked what they saw. And that was that moment for me and Jason that we thought, okay, what the heck? How can we get up the next morning and talk about what we're going to have for dinner? Or how's your day, sweetheart? That was that fist-clenching moment, because I'm a fighter just like Jason. I care very much about getting the bad guys off the street. So what are we going to do? We can't track the IP addresses. We tried to call Cox Cable to figure out if they could. And we didn't know what to do. And you know how God shakes things up in your life when you think you're going real smooth down the road? We were happy. We didn't have to change. But no, that wasn't going to be our life. So we were talking to a prayer minister, and she said, you guys need to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, go to Bible school and get trained up, because this thing is so evil. The thing you're fighting will kill you if you're not spiritually trained up. So we found out that Bible school that my parents thought was a cult because we were leaving them was Victory Victory Bible Institute. So that cult leader was Pastor Billy Joe. Isn't that funny? And so I did. I told my family, if you think this is a cult, you should go check it out, because if it's really the wrong thing, you should, step in. It's been a whirlwind since we went to Victory Bible College. It took Jason about a year to really jump into this thing. He said, there's no way we're leaving Colorado to go to Tulsa. We're not going to do it. But God shut every door, and it was a miracle how we got here. Went through school, still wondering, what is this thing? The word sex trafficking was not being used very much at the time, because that was like 10 years ago. So we weren't really using the word. We found an organization that was just starting out called Stop Child Trafficking Now, and we became directors in that organization, and we pioneered. We got with the mayor, we got with the chief of police, we got with the sheriff's department, we got with law enforcement, homeland security, all of them, and started kind of going down this road of what is this thing. And people argued with us as if there really wasn't a problem here, and as if we should know statistics when we're just civilians. So it was a hard battle. We have a lot of bumps and bruises, but if you're called to something, those bumps and bruises are just what happens when you're in your calling, right? And then you get back up and you keep on going. And I want to say something that I really want you guys to get in your heart, and I want you to pass it to your wives or whatever females are in your life. It's a really hard topic. but it's not happening to us. It's hard for me to hear about a baby being raped, but it's not. We feel about it, and we need to get out there, like Tim said, get on that front line, bust open those doors, and get those predators. So that's our spirit, and that's what we started to do. So we changed our whole life. We started with Stop Child Trafficking Now. We pioneered that. We had 40 cities knowing what was going on around the United States. And we really felt in Bible school that we were supposed to fight the problem here. You know how a lot of people get trained up and they go overseas to tell people how to live? Well, I think we're dying right here. I think we have enough problems right here to plant ourselves, because I could go to 31st and Memorial and I could find trafficked minors right now. I could walk to those hotels there and I could find some girls that I'm working with right now. I could go to 11th and Utica, 11th and Garnett. I can go 11th and any street in Tulsa and I could find trafficking happening right now. So I want you guys not to worry about how it makes you feel, and I want you to listen to what God's telling you to do. So we didn't like the direction that SCT Now was going, because they wanted to be donor driven. They wanted to take the community out of it. So we started the Demand Project about almost 4 years ago. The demand being, like what Tim said, who is demanding sex? Who's making, there's a buyer, or there's a seller, that's the pimp. There's a product, that's the victim, that's the child. And then who's creating the demand? Who's buying these kids for sex? So we're the Demand Project, because our project is to stop the demand. So as Tim said, Jason goes online. He was trained by Homeland Security, and he goes online as a 14-year-old little girl, and he talks with these predators without any kind of luring or anything. And he talks to the predators, and he hands over all information over to law enforcement and gets them busted. And he's gotten a couple handfuls of bad guys off the street.
7 predators successfully, and not lured in, okay?
No.
This isn't entrapment.
No entrapment. We
Okay.
get that word.
He's talking just like 14-year-olds talk, right? And then they come out and they lure, right? And they groom. And so he plays this and then gives it to law enforcement, and sure enough, not only in Oklahoma, but he's been in California. He's all over the nation. 7 successful prosecutions, 7 predators doing hard time.
Even in Canada, you guys. He even got one in Canada.
Wow.
His last predator that he would be very proud to tell you about, just as he got this bad guy, he had been talking to him for 3 years. I have to tell you that in order to prosecute a bad guy online, they have to commit a sex act. So either they have to masturbate on camera, or they have to pass child pornography over the internet. So he sees really bad things. So be in prayer for him, because he is a normal man, and he needs lots of prayer. But this last bad guy was moving in his girlfriend into his house with 2 young kids. I think they're like 2 and 4-ish. And that was that guy's age that he liked. So he would have hurt those kids, but he got him busted before he got him. So his area is doing that. Now my area, like
I love
Tim
you, girl.
said,
We got 9
I know.
minutes.
So mine is the rescue restoration. You'll see one of the videos on there. How do I do that? I work directly with law enforcement and probation, U.S. Attorney's Office. I just took a girl yesterday to a program. This is going to tee it up for Kathy. This little girl was trafficked from Tulsa to Louisiana to Houston and Dallas. She had a baby in her tummy about 6 months old, and her pimp beat her so badly that the baby was miscarried. She has wounds all over her body. She has a little bit of mental illness, but it's because of the PTSD, and it's because of the demonic influence that's been around her. So I had her in a program. She got kicked out of the program, so I took her to another program yesterday. It's hard work, you guys. It's not easy, because she's lashing out at me, and I didn't even do anything. I'm trying to help her, but you know how sometimes the rescuer is kind of the bad guy in the girl's mind? I just wanted to give you an idea. These girls are being lured in by love. They're being lured as if these guys love them, and they're doing a bait and switch. They're beating them, they're raping them, they're selling them, they're drugging them. This girl has all kinds of problems that she's going to be in and out of programs, but once we get her out of there, we've got nowhere else to put her. So we're calling on the churches in the community, if you know of a foster family that could take this little girl in and help her once she gets out. She's only 15, she'll be 16 when she gets out. But we're kind of going towards that, and we're trying to get this model of a home for these girls to transition out of this home back into this community. So I know that was a whole lot to throw out there. I could talk for hours, but I want to bring up Kathy to tell you a little bit about a model that a group of us are trying to put together that would be a home for these minor girls.
Thank you, Kristin. Kathy LaFortune.
If you guys would be kind enough to maybe stay 5 or 10 minutes over what our regular time is, because this is good information, and we need to hear what Kathy has to say, and thank you so much. I wish we had more time.
Can we
But
set
if you would do that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, good afternoon, and I have known Tim, like he said, for about 35 years.
Long time.
And we used to do Christmas parties together. We would bring a lot of the assistant DAs to each other's homes and make Yule logs. And you can imagine all our families together doing that. We had a great time, and we need to start that up again. It's been a long time. But my husband and Bill, I'm sure, wish for the good old days when they were both prosecuting murder and burglary and robbery. And I took a different path in life. God has always sent me into places that I can't believe I'm involved in, but I have been on the other side of the spectrum, which is the defense work. And I started off, I had the fortunate experience to work in city court for Judge Francine, who I now work for, but I started working in city court in 1984. And this is where I was first exposed to women who were involved in some kind of crime. And mind you, this is municipal court, 1984. The maximum penalty was like 90 days in jail, $500 fine. It was usually petty larceny or DUI or trespassing. And the female crime was typically prostitution. So Dennis Larson, who was the police officer assigned to the jail at that time, and he's married to Karen Larson, who's on Channel 2. He would bring in the inmates, and the women would go to the cell on the end, which was a very small cell, because back then, women just didn't commit a whole lot of crimes, and then the other 2 cells were meant for the males. But typically, the women would be in there for one crime, prostitution. And in 1984, when I started working, I would typically ask these women, like, what else is going on in your life? Well, I work at a daycare center during the day for children, and at night, they prostitute. And, you know, I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I remember hearing these stories and thinking, I can't believe this. This is crazy. So, fast forward, I went back to TU and I got a doctorate in psychology because I kept working with these people, and a lot of them really did have severe mental illness, either schizophrenia, bipolar illness, but back then we didn't really talk about PTSD like we do today. And I ended up working at Raider, which was the maximum security for juvenile offenders. And really, we didn't really look at the females very much. I worked on the intensive treatment program, which was the unit for males, juveniles, who had committed major crimes. And the females were kind of off in their own little world, and nobody really worried about the girls. It wasn't a big deal. Back then in 1990 and 91, female violent crime was not anything like it is today. And so fast forward again, you get to 2016, and last year I went to work for Judge Francine again. You know, this has been like, I guess that's 31 years later, and now I'm working for her again. And I'm doing parenting capacity evaluations for when children are taken out of the home, are considered deprived. And so I have to submit a report to Judge Francine that says, do I think that this person has a severe mental illness or cognitive disorder that can be remedied in a reasonable amount of time considering the age of the child? That's one part of my job at the Juvenile Detention Center, the Juvenile Bureau. The other part of my job, which was an awakening, were how I became involved with Kristin again, and that's the delinquency side. And this delinquency side involves doing evaluations about what to do with these children that are 14, 15, 16, 17. And, 31 years later, we went from prostitution, and now I'm sitting in a room with a 14-year-old who's had cocaine injected between her toes when she was 12, and she was taken to a hotel room, stripped down, naked, put in a bathtub, had a video made, and I'm thinking, this is so beyond prostitution. I mean, it's slavery. It's slavery, like Tim talked about. We saw Free State of Jones, the movie, last weekend, and some of the scenes in that movie, it involves the Civil War, as you probably know, and some of the scenes where they were beating the slaves, I thought, this is like child trafficking. Exactly like child trafficking. I worked 2 years ago in mental health court, and I had a client from a different county who'd committed a crime here but had other crimes in other counties. And she had been locked in the trunk of a car and only allowed to get out to do the act, and then placed back in the trunk of the car. And part of me, I just can't even believe that like Tim's talked about and like Kristin's talked about, how do you even put your head around this? And our tendency is to say, well, we'll just shove it away, like Kristin was talking about, the feelings that come along with that. And we can't do that anymore. We have to save these children. It's outrageous. It needs to change. My husband, who's now a judge, brings some transcripts about these cases that involve Backpage, which is on the internet where they pick up these young girls, and the pictures and all of it goes with all of this. So a few months ago, I had asked Lisa Bain to come out to juvenile, and because I wanted her to be able to give her dogs to these kids when they get picked up and brought into detention. And so we started talking, and I thought, we have to do something for these girls. There is nowhere to place these girls. Nowhere. Unless Kristin is able to get one of the facilities across our state to take these girls in. And it is very few and far between. They're just, like Tim said, there's no place to put them. And the problem with foster care is that what family wants to take in a child trafficked girl? Because the problem is these girls are like, they're adults, dysfunctional adults in children's bodies. Their mentality is so much different than the girls that we worked with at Raider. There's just a fundamental transformation that happens. It's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome with Patty Hearst. They love their abusers. Or whatever that word means. That's not a typical definition of love, but that's how they see it. And so I called Kristin a couple of months ago, and we had discussed the idea of a facility. And you think about Tulsa Boys Home, which is a fantastic facility. But where is a Tulsa Girls Home? We don't have one. Because typically when you think about who commits crimes, you think of males committing murder and robbery. Last night on the news there was a woman, I think they just arrested for robbery, bank robbery, and it's kind of shocking to us to think about women doing those kinds of crimes. But this particular crime is fundamentally different. The mentality of these girls, I can't even begin to tell you how confusing and messed up and completely dysfunctional their way of thinking is. It's almost like bipolar illness. One minute they'll be fine and they can talk like an adult, and the next minute they're like a 5-year-old child. And they have no concept of true love and true caring, because like Tim said, their parents have not been there for them. The other side of this whole thing is that the pimps who do these things, what I learned in graduate school, these are called psychopaths, and they're not mentally ill. They're psychopaths. They are cunning, they're superficially charming, they have backgrounds in criminal versatility, they do a lot of different kinds of crime. They have absolutely no remorse. The way that concept, that construct, psychopathy is defined, fits the concept of a pimp, what you would think of as a pimp. It's not a mental illness to be a pimp. It's a fundamental character disorder called psychopathy. And I would imagine that if you were to look at a lot of these pimps and do a psychological evaluation, you would find that they fit that definition of psychopathy, a psychopath. So anyway, I called Kristin and we got together, and then we talked to Mary Kevin McNamara, who used to be, she used to work with the alternative school called Phoenix Rising. And so we've created a task force. We've come together. Ann Sublett, who's a child attorney, is on our task force, and we want to create a facility. And so we've started looking at different facilities, and the one that is most promising, one of the ones that is most promising is called Wellspring, and it's in Atlanta, Georgia. And you all, it is amazing what they do with these young girls. I don't even want to say women, because they're not women, they're children. And they take these kids from ages 12 to 17, and they are immersed in all types of programming and just wraparound services to totally change their lives, because they are so, I can't even describe it. I don't even think there's a word for this other than just complete trauma.